Chief, how does this translate into modern firefighting at FDNY, the culture, the procedures, policy? How have you taken the lessons from this fire and put them into action?
Yeah. So there's so many transferable points to today's firefighter. After a fire today, you shower and you still smell the fire, and sometimes, several showers later. So that's you off gassing, which isn't good, right? So the absorption of chemicals. So making sure that members after a fire that they shower, making sure that they're using all of their personal protective equipment, that we're cleaning it as frequently as we need to. All those things are all lessons that that we're fortunate to have somebody like Dan who's a champion for it, and making sure that we educate our new firefighters, because that was an unusual building, unusual in the fact of that it had all those dangerous dangerous materials that were burning. But today, everything is made of plastics and that type of stuff. I mean, that the phone company building, you can find that building exists in almost every city, every large city in America has a building that's similar. And but the fact is, the next private dwelling fire you go to is going to have a lot of chemicals in it that are very similar to what was burning in 1975. But now it's everywhere. The plastics and what's being everything's plastics, everything's lightweight, everything is it's creating this toxic soup that firefighters are in, and we need to make sure that we're best protecting ourselves, making sure you're getting annual medicals. That every exposure you get, you got to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And I think those are very transferable lessons to today's firefighter.
I have to say, just listening to both of you speak about this, and especially Dan recounting everything, you exude the passion of this topic. And I think for anybody who listens, they won't forget the things that you've said. And Frank, I think that what you're doing is so commendable, because you're making sure that it's never forgotten. You're making sure that this doesn't happen again to people. And along those lines, I wanted to ask you about a remembrance bulletin. Can you talk to us about what that is?
Yeah, so in the FDNY, when we say we never forget, we back that up, right? We back that up with action. And one of the latest products that we've been working on for the past year, myself and my team, led by Battalion Chief John Davies, we came up with these remembrance documents. And what they do is they look at all of the line of duty deaths in the FDNY, and we look at what lessons from the past are still relevant today. So we have firefighters that were killed in a loft building in the early 1900s, in Lower Manhattan. We still have plenty of loft buildings, and the way they died in those fires are very relevant today to firefighters. So we want to make sure that we remember our fallen members by honoring them and the lessons that they provide us. Simply put, the fire service repeats too many lessons, and we repeat them by losing firefighters, whether it's in New York or another city anywhere else. And we want to make sure that however a firefighter dies, that we honor that and make sure that that information is passed along in actionable intelligence from that line of duty death. Now, and it's not to minimize some of the line of duty deaths that we've had, but a member that that got kicked by a horse isn't, there's not a transferable lesson to today's firefighting. So we created about 100 of them. And what's unique, there's only a couple of those remembrance bulletins that are not an official line of duty death. And that's one of them, is the February 27th one that we put out to honor the telephone fire. There's no official firefighter deaths related to that incident, but yet we covered it in our remembrance bulletin because we know that the lessons that fire provide are timeless and very relevant to today's fire. And we also know we likely lost more than 100 firefighters to occupational cancer and from that fire. And the other important point is the New York telephone fire was one fire, one exposure. And we know that, you can get cancer from one fire or one exposure. We also know that that chronic exposure over a career also increases your risk. So we have to make sure that we're doing all that we can. And that's the genesis behind the Remembrance Bulletin, is making sure that these lessons are never forgotten.
Thanks, Chief. And thank you, Bonnie, for the sound effects.
Always on cue.
Always on cue.